In the final chapter of the text, we're going to look at biodiversity and classification. And so in this first part, we're going to look at defining biodiversity, looking at the levels of taxonomic classification, the three major domains of life, and then the six-category classification system that we now use for organisms. So to begin with, keep in mind that biologists are still discovering the range of biological diversity that exists on this planet. So keep in mind that what we're talking about as far as living things and how we classify them, there are so many species that we don't even know about. Biodiversity by definition, if you break that word down, bio meaning life, diverse meaning a variety. So biodiversity is the full range of variety within and among living species. And so as we've begun to understand evolutionary origins of different groups, we've been able to kind of categorize these into a classification scheme. Now, according to computer databases, we have about 1.3 million species identified, meaning they have a name, we know who they're related to, but some scientists actually suggest that there are approximately 8.7 million species on this planet, which means only about 20% of them are actually known to science. And so, as we have discovered new living things, the first thing that was developed was a classification scheme. It's known as taxonomy, which is the discipline in biology that we identify organisms, we identify their names, and we classify them based on certain rules. And so there are 8 levels of taxonomic classification, and they are listed on the screen from the most inclusive, which is the largest category, to the least inclusive, which is the smallest. So this would be domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. When I was taught this in high school, we learned, did King Philip come over for good spaghetti? And so that it was a sentence that helped us remember the order that these levels go in. So when a new species is found, the first thing that we try to do is we start at the largest category. We try to determine which domain it falls in. And then once we've determined its domain, then we get a little more specific. Which kingdom does it fall in? Then which phylum, which class, which order, which family, and by the time we get down to genus and species, we have a specific name for that individual organism. Now, as far as the largest category is concerned, the domains, there are only 3 of them that all living things fall into. They are the domain bacteria, domain archaea, and domain eukarya. And so if we look at specific differences between these 3, starting off with domain bacteria, this domain, this category, consists only of prokaryotes. Remember that word prokaryote means they do not have a nucleus. Okay, but what they do have is their cells contain cell walls, and those cell walls contain peptidoglycan. So if there are a cell that does not have a nucleus, but their cell walls have peptidoglycan, we typically put them in the domain bacteria. Second domain is known as domain archaea. These are also prokaryotes, so cells without a nucleus, but their cell walls do not have peptidoglycan. We also know that those that fall under domain archaea typically are found in extreme conditions, extreme environments. And then the third category, domain eukarya, these would be organisms where their cells are eukaryotes, meaning they do contain a nucleus and they do contain membrane-bound organelles. So when a new species is discovered, the first thing we do is we take these 3 domains, we look at the characteristic of this new species, and we figure out which domain it fits in. And then as we classify it into a domain, it allows us to continue classification on through the different levels. Now, the old system had 5 kingdoms in it. But what we have learned over time is that you actually need a 6-category classification system. And so if we look at the new 6 levels of classification here, again, we have our 3 domains. And then from the domains, you'll notice that there are kingdoms underneath it. Now, the kingdoms that are listed here are only found in domain eukarya because kingdoms of bacteria and archaea have not yet been established. But domain eukarya has 4 kingdoms. They are the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the fungus kingdom, and the protista kingdom. So what would happen then is if you found a new species, You determined that it fell into domain eukarya, so it was a cell with a nucleus and with organelles. You would then determine which kingdom it falls in, plant, animal, fungus, or protista. However, if you determined it fell into domain bacteria, domain archaea, you would then move through their classification schemes. So this is your 6 categories of classification. And so from there, we have this thing known as the tree of life. Biologists think life should be classified according to evolutionary relationships. And so this is established not from the fact that you came from monkeys, because when a lot of people hear that term evolution, they think that that's the case. But it's the concept that all living things came from a common ancestor. And this is based on the similarities that have occurred in DNA sequences. So we know that all living things have DNA, and so based on the DNA sequences and the similarities between organisms' sequences, it has allowed us to establish evolutionary relationships and build what they call the tree of life.